Emperor's Finest were hit by a huge nerf hammer in the latest Balance Dataslate, so it's time for us to relearn how to build a competitive Adeptus Custodes list. First, we'll discuss the faction rules and my general thoughts on how we should approach this task. So Custodes have katas to boost the efficiency in combat, and 4+ feel no pain against mortal wounds to protect them from being too easily picked off. The mortal wound part, unfortunately, now is much less valuable because the devastating wounds were turned into just ignoring invulnerable saves and regular armor saves, so we are not going to be able to use that feel no pain against those wounds unless they change something in an FAQ sometime in the future, because there are quite a lot of abilities that are now much less valuable. For example, Drago's ability to ignore mortal wounds for his squad of Terminators, that now is much less valuable because those mortal wounds are much rarer. So the -1 damage stratagem is now our best defense from those devastating wounds, because they can be affected by damage modifiers, and that's pretty much the best way to help us in this situation. But I'm not gonna lie, the devastating wounds now are a big problem for Custodes. That's why I think it's probably even better than we have this new MSU style of the army, because most of our data sheets were essentially limited to 5 models per unit. Namely, you can take Custodian Guard in 4s of 5s, Wardens in 4s of 5s, the Alaris still can be a 6-man squad, and the Bikers are now only a 2 or 3-man squad. Before the data slate, we were essentially the craziest army in melee in the game because of our melee tools. Firstly, just huge bricks of golden armored custodians who can blend through almost anything in the game, with rerolls to wound with extra hits from sustained hits or lethal hits if you need that, and also fight first on the objective, which you don't even need to pay for in most cases because you have shield captains. Now that stuff is, most of it is gone, because we still have some very nice attacks, but we cannot have the 10-man squads, and we have to pay real command points for the fight first stratagem now. Don't get me wrong, captains are still very much necessary, because you really want to have access to that -1 damage stratagem as much as possible, again as your best defense from devastating wounds. All in all, our offensive capabilities are still there, we just need to adapt to that new MSU style of the army. The best way to do so, I think, in my opinion, is by relying a bit more on the firepower to actually soften up whatever targets your units expect to be charged by, because again, we still have that fight first ability, we just need to have command points to use it. Or if you are charging yourself. Stratagems like +1 to wound against monsters and vehicles, and just the sheer volume of high quality attacks that you can have lethal hits or sustained hits on mean that even with smaller sized squads, we will still be able to put a lot of hurt into almost anything in the game. Also, another interesting aspect, Alaris are now the biggest squad available to us, 6 men with a potential for a captain, being the 7th model, and they are, yes, 5 points per model more expensive, but that's just 30 points more for the squad, which for Custodes it's almost nothing. Fitting them into a land raider or using rapid ingress, in case if you are using them with the captain, is probably the closest we can get to the old feeling of a big blob charging in. By the way, if you want me to analyze and enhance your list or dive deeper into the nuanced strategies of 40k together, check out my Patreon. Your support not only keeps the channel alive, but also gets you personalized feedback and insights. Thank you for your attention. Now that we have the goal in sight, let's discuss the units that will actually be doing the damage and helping us achieve that goal. So we have now less stuff to play with, and also the squad sizes are limited, so less synergy with characters. Some things like board control and vigil and ending stratagem, it's even better to have that MSU style of the list. Those of you who are maybe less versed in the 40k terminology, MSU means multiple small units, and it doesn't mean minimal size. So I'm not saying that we always have to run Wardens as 4, Custodian Guard as 4. I would say that probably 5 is the best size in most cases. So from the competitive standpoint, our main goal is to have just enough resources at the right point on the board at the right time to apply overwhelming force there and actually finish off the unit. It was just a bit easier to do that when we could run a 10-man Custodian Guard unit with a Blade Champion. That was just easy because that was the maximum squad size. It had a lot of that extra oomph to it, and we didn't have to really think through some of the interactions and maybe supporting fire before we went in for the charge. Now we have to be more careful with that. Let's discuss the melee damage dealing units. First, the aforementioned Alarus bricks are, in my opinion, a staple choice for getting rid of the big units like vehicles and monsters, and also some tougher character blobs like Wraith Guard, for example. Full reroll to wound regardless of position on the board is very strong, and durability for them is a problem, so that's where delivery comes in. As we discussed before, Rapid Ingress or Land Raider. My personal favorite is Land Raider, just because I think that's a bit more reliable, but Rapid Ingress in them is also a nice option and doesn't make you spend 240 points. Next are Custodian Guard. They're still awesome. Their price is still very good. For 50 points, their stat line is just wonderful, and some armies in 40k would just kill to have something like Custodian Guards in their army with the same rule set. Their big combo with the Blade Champion, in my opinion, isn't gone. Yes, it's much less valuable to transport with rerollable charges, advances, and advance and charge a 5-man squad than a 10-man squad, but still a 5-man squad, as we discussed before, can do a lot of damage. So I think having one 5-man squad with a Blade Champion is a way to go now. Just need to be more careful choosing the target and maybe softening it up before going in. Wardens, the weakest of the three in terms of the melee output, because they have the very same 5 attacks per guy, but they don't get access to the full reroll to wound. However, they have the highest probability of actually making it into combat on foot because of their 4-up shrug and -1 to wound they have. And again, their 5-man squad size is just perfect, especially if you want to run them with a Land Raider, because previously you could not fit them with a character into a Land Raider. Now you can. You can have a 5-man squad with a captain, and I think that's a good way to do it, because even a 5-man squad with a captain will do a lot of damage. I'll give you a small example. I have played against Custodes with my Chaos Space Marines, and a full squad of Wardens has almost annihilated my entire brick of Possessed with 6+ shrug from the Master of Possession. Don't say that it's not enough of an output for a 5-man squad, because that's not true, even for 55 points a model. Now let's discuss the bikes. The combo with Captain plus 2 bikes or 3 bikes went up just a little bit, like 15 or 20 points, but in my opinion they're still very much interesting because of their ability to move 24 inches in one turn, because of Captain's once per battle ability to move in the fight phase. Yes, you cannot charge after that, but you can be extremely mobile and can essentially put yourself into a place where you will be very, very annoying for the opponent in the next turn. And bikes are quite badass in combat because they get lance, so they get +1 to wound, and it works not only against vehicles and monsters like Slayers of Nightmares Stratagem, and you don't have to pay CP for that obviously, but it also works against smaller targets. So if you're charging Space Marines or Terminators, you will be wounding them on 2s, and katas also work on them. So yes, they're not very survivable, yes, they cost quite a lot, but if you manage to position them carefully and use them surgically, they will reap benefits. Plus, don't forget about their 6-inch consolidation, so again, more disruption after the fight, and also 6 to 8 mortal wounds that they can do per game with their once per game ability. Now let's discuss the damage dealing in the shooting phase, and here the best hands down unit that you can have is the Caladius Grav Tank, because it wasn't nerfed, it was awesome before. The natural predators of these tanks are now much less prevalent or just completely gone. Like Wraith Knights, you will probably never see them again because Eldar players don't know what an OK unit is. Their profile of 4 shots with lethal hits +2 linked with strength 12 AP3 damage D6 +2 for some reason. So they're just perfect to clear out the dangerous threats that your opponent might have in their back line or something that is more in front of you. Yes, they're not awesome to deal with elite infantry. You can run Adeptus cannons for that, but I don't recommend it just because of how good Arachnus are. And let's be honest, Custodes, with how good their melee is, I don't think they have a problem with dealing with things like Terminators. Well, 2 or 3 of these are must-have now in Custodes lists, in my opinion. Yes, they're very expensive, they're very hard to get, and if you don't have access to them, we will discuss an alternative list at the end of the video where you don't need these Forge World units. But if you have them, definitely use them because they're awesome. Sagittarium Custodians, they're cheapest troops now somehow, and have decent heavy bolter style shooting. They're, I think, essentially exactly like the heavy bolter profile, and they can debuff enemy non-vehicle monster units with -1 to hit, which is very valuable. Again, that works well with you maybe charging something in and not turning on your -1 to hit kata, but instead turning on your offensive kata, like lethal hits or sustained hits, but that target will suffer -1 to hit from the Sagittarium shots anyway. Also have once per game devastating wounds ability, which is nice, I suppose, especially now when it was nerfed. It's like very niche, but good to have anyways. And also their melee is fine, so they have 4 attacks with Misericordias at 5 -2/1. So good unit, cheap for Custodes as they go now, and there is a good purpose for them as an end game piece to have, so you can park them on the objective. They're survivable enough to withstand some of the indirect fire much better, obviously, than Sister's unit, which Sister's unit can perform some other tasks for you for objective grabbing, and also they will be a thing to use at the end of the game when you don't have a lot of resources, but so doesn't your opponent. Next, Land Raider. Good old venerable Land Raider the Custodes have. You needed to transport your guys, obviously, and to give them that ability to charge out of the Land Raider, but 4 last cannon shots are also good to have, and they're hitting on 2s, so they're more reliable than the Space Marine equivalent if you don't count for the Oath of Moment. At 240 points, I think it's a great deal, especially considering that you also get a 300 killer missile, heavy bolter shots, and obviously the tough platform that the Land Raider is. The last damage dealer in shooting that I want to mention is the good old Custodian Guard and Alaris themselves. We've already discussed them as melee, but don't forget that they are also good in shooting. Both get rerolls to wound for their numerous bolter shots. Alaris also have their nice grenade launchers, and they can do a lot of damage to any unit that is sub T7 with a character for Alaris, or for Custodian Guard, just any unit if they are parked on the objective. That is the shooting that you shouldn't forget, especially the fire twice that you have, and that's what I mean when I talk about softening up the target. Before, you could just run your Custodes into a unit and kill it outright. Maybe now you could consider first using your actually shots with the spears and only then charging in. That might be a good idea. Don't try to deal with a tank this way. The tanks should be dealt with in melee or using your big guns like the Kaldis grab tank. These shots should be reserved for something softer, otherwise you're losing a lot of efficiency. Because even though the full rerolls to wound might sound like an almighty thing, actually wounding on 6s with full rerolls is virtually the same thing as wounding on 5s without rerolls, and wounding on 5s without rerolls is not great. So, support units, we need some disruption, and we also need some cheap objective control, and we don't get to use the exaction squads anymore, so we have to rely on our trusty sisters. So start a list with 2 units of 4, in my opinion that's a good balance. You don't need too many of them, because otherwise you're going to be investing a lot of points into them, and you have some other things, especially now with MSU style of list, to control the board. You just need 1 or 2 of them. 2 is the best number, because 1 will be controlling your home objective, and yes, there's still a lot of indirect going around, but at least you will force your opponent to shoot at them. And the second squad is a cheap way for you to keep a midfield objective yours without spending a CP on the sticky objective stratagem. after your Custodes clearing. Second unit that I really like now is Vanetary Custodians. If you, again, have access to the Forge World stuff, they are quite good because they've received a discount. They cost now, I think, 67, 68 points a model, which is close to Alaris, but a bit less. And they have 10-inch move. They can fall back, shoot, and charge. They also have free rapid ingress. So for 200 points, you get 3 of these guys that can rapid ingress for free, being very annoying and quite disruptive for your opponent. Plus the fact that they have infantry keyword and 10-inch move means that after they actually rapid ingress, unlike some of the slower bricks like Terminators, for example, you will be able to get these guys very, very close to whatever your opponent had moved there into position on their turn. And also they fight well because they have lance on their spears, and they have the very same profile as a Custodian spear. So essentially they fight just like bikers, but cost 13 points less each. So if Vanetary had some character support, I would say they're outright better than bikes, but because bikers have that access to the captain combo, I think they're quite close. And lastly, 2-man Alaris squads are still the cheapest Custodes unit that you can send into Deep Strike and pressure your opponent's backline. And it's not a must-have, but if you have designed a good list and you have around 140, 150 points left, I think they are one of the, or if not the best thing to add to that last 150 points spot. So here is my roster example. This is the Forge World version. So I have 2 Custodes grab tanks here, as you can see, and I don't have Vanetary because they were just not really a fit for this list, in my opinion. So we have Blade Champion, who is going to join the Custodian Guard squad. We have Shield Captain, who's going to join the 5 Wardens. We have 2 units of Sisters, obviously, that Custodian Guard squad, that Custodian Warden squad, 2 grab tanks, a full 6-man Alaris squad inside a Venerable Land Raider. So not a lot of units, obviously, for Custodes. That's quite a usual thing. And we have a lot of shooting, 2 great anti-tank platforms with Custodes grab tanks. We have a very survivable Land Raider who is transporting our Alaris across the board. We have quite survivable Wardens with a captain who can protect them with -1 damage stratagem for free whilst they're advancing across the board. And we have a faster, more mobile unit with Ceaseless Hunter with the Blade Champion and his 5-man Custodian Guard squad, who's going to be on another flank. But I hear you, you might not want to spend $200 on 2 tanks. In that case, here is another version of the Custodes list. Here we have the same Blade Champion plus 5 Custodes combo. We have a Shield Captain and again those 5 Wardens. We have a Shield Captain on Dawn Eagle Jet Bike with his 2 Virtus Praetors. We have 1 squad of Sisters, and we have those 5 Alaris in a Land Raider. So that's a very similar style of a list, but obviously we have much less shooting here, 2 tanks less, we have a bit more of the Custodian Guard, and we have bikes. So if I had to bet, I would say that the first list would probably perform better in a competitive setting, but the second one I think also has some muscles and could perform in well-trained hands. I truly think that there is no reason to cry about Custodes, yet they are still a very powerful army with some extremely efficient units. We just need to find that sweet spot, and I hope that this video helps you achieve that, and I'll see you next time.